Welcome to Gee Whiz. Today we're going to visit with Dick and Crane at Holiday Farm on Route 9 in Dalton for a tour of the Sugar Shack. And we will learn just how maple syrup is made. Listen closely. There's a lot more to maple syrup than meets the taste buds.
We're going to talk today about maple syrup, and there's a lot of science in maple syrup. One of the things that a lot of people wonder about is what makes the sap run. One of the things that is important is that we have warm days and cold nights. The warm days cause the tree to heat up the sap and the gases in the sap to expand and create pressure, and that pushes the sap out of the hole here, and it drips into the bucket from the spout. The cold nights are important because that's when the dissolved gases shrink back into solution and the tree sucks water from the ground up and mixes it with the sugar it's stored to fill back up with sap again. And then the next warm day, that sap heats up, the bubbles come out of solution, create pressure, and push more sap back out. So you need the cold nights and the warm days in order to get the sap to run. A little bit.
Along with a butterfly.
And a moth.
Go ahead and
Pour it in. Okay, can you hang it back up?
You remember where it was on the tree, Caleb? And I'll bring in the lid over. You want to pour it in there, Shane?
Great.
Okay, let's go, Rob. Put the lids on.
What does that sap look like?
Water.
It looks a lot like water.
How do you open this thing?
You just pour it. You don't have to take it off. Just tip it. Pour it right in there.
Move forward.
Yep.
Ooh, look at the little air. Pour in. Not too bad.
Did you taste some sap? What did it taste like?
It tastes like a little sweet.
A little sweet. That's the report, that the sap tastes a little sweet and looks like water. It's like water and tastes a little sweet. So we know we've got a lot of work to do to get the sap to be maple syrup. You want me to?
Yeah.
Wow, that one's really full.
I know, mine too.
You know what? I'm gonna have to dump this out. Let me. Plastic buckets to pour the sap from the buckets on the trees so that we can carry the sap from 4 or 5 buckets all at once. And then we pour it into this tank, and we use the tractor to move the tank along from tree to tree and eventually back to the sugar house, where we pump the sap into the tanks in the sugar house, where it then goes into the evaporator to be boiled in the syrup. At the ends of these branches are the buds that will be the blossoms and leaves later this spring. When those buds begin to swell up, the sap that runs out of the trees will no longer be sweet. We keep an eye on those buds because that's one of the ways we know when the sugaring season is going to be over. When those buds swell up, that's the end of sugaring for this year. It looks like a giant spider web of green tubing, but this connects the tap holes from different maple trees to a tank that's at the bottom of the hill, and the sap flows from the spout into the tubing, down the tubing till it connects to a main line, down the main line to the tank. And we'll see main lines and tanks. But first, the sap flows from the hole in the tree into the spout and down into the tubing. And right now you can see the level of the sap is right here. Now the sap can't flow through the tubing any faster than the sap runs into it, because if it flowed faster, something has to take up that space. So it's creating a natural vacuum, and this natural vacuum actually helps make the sap run. But if I take this spout out and let air rush in, it will allow the sap to run down through the tubing faster, but it won't actually help more sap run into the tubing. So it's not really helping us to do that. It actually hurts us because we lose the vacuum. But from a demonstration point of view, it's nice because you'll be able to see the sap flow. See the sap running down through there? And you can hear there's a gurgle. I'll put it here. You can hear the suction. I think you can hear the suction when I do that. Where'd that? At any rate, that shows you how the sap flows down through the tubes, and we'll go and find a manifold where several of these green lines, which are called tap lines, connect to the main line. This is what we call a manifold. Here we have 4 different tap lines coming into the main line in one place. Now, each one of these tap lines is connected to a hole that goes into this manifold that allows the sap to run down and into the main line. And the sap then continues down the main line, and there's several more of these manifolds along this line connecting the rest of the tubing to the main line. Eventually, this black line goes all the way down through the woods to a tank where the sap's collected. As you can imagine, there's a lot of hardware involved in hooking up a tubing system like this, and that shed is where we keep all the little parts and pieces that we need to set a tubing system up. Sap is not running very well, but you can see a small amount of sap is running into this tank here at the end of the pipeline, which we call the main line. And the tank isn't very full because we pumped it out late yesterday afternoon, but there's a little bit in there. We have the really big runs. The sap will run through these pipes so fast that it's almost filling up the whole end of the pipe, almost like a garden hose. And we have to sometimes come and pump the tanks twice a day or they'll overflow. Some of the best runs we get happen when a storm is coming. The forces that make the sap run is that the pressure outside the tree is lower than the pressure inside the tree. Therefore, the sap wants to run. When you have a storm coming, the atmospheric pressure is getting lower. That's why they often call it a low pressure area. When that low pressure area comes in right after a good cold night, it often is warming up and the atmospheric pressure is going down, and that will make for some of the best runs of the season. A lot of people have problems with squirrels gnawing on their tubing. We don't have a problem with squirrels gnawing on the tubing because we have fishers, and the fishers here love to eat squirrels, and so the squirrel population is pretty low. But we have problems with fishers biting holes in the main lines, in the black plastic main lines. They don't chew it or gnaw it the way squirrels do. They just chomp it and poke holes in it. Fortunately, it's pretty easy to fix, And so I think we're really better off with the fishers than we would be with a lot of squirrels. We take this green line, this tap line, down, most of it every year. You might wonder, how do we remember where to put it all back up? Because each section is cut to the right length to get to the next tree. It's not just going to fit to any tree anywhere. And we managed to do it by having a system. These little points on the line always stick out when the connector here is down, and that goes on the outside of the tree. So we know that the tubing here has to go to the left. Where we have a T connector, that always points down, so that the line coming off of the T must go to the right. Then as you see up on this tree here, the points are sticking out. That means that the tubing goes around the right side of that tree and then to the left up to the next tree. We use this system to tell us which way to go when we go from tree to tree. And as long as we haven't changed anything, it works really well. I've just come back from collecting the tanks up in the sugar bush, and now I'm going to pump this sap into our storage tank in the sugar house. No. Okay. That same pump to pump the sap from the tanks that are in the woods into the tank in the truck, and then we use it to pump from the tank in the truck into the tank in the sugar house. The tank that we're pumping the sap into, it's a 900-gallon galvanized tank, and we have another 600-gallon stainless steel tank down below it. You can hear the sap running into the tank. This is a very simple device to tell us how much sap we have in the tank in the back room, because we sure don't want to run out when we're not expecting to. And this says that we have a little over 500 gallons of sap in that tank back there. We've got 500 gallons of sap. We checked the sap sugar content, and it's only 1.5% sugar. So we have to get rid of an awful lot of water to concentrate that small amount of sugar in the sap to 66 or 67%, which is what it is in maple syrup. So we have to get rid of a lot of water. 1.5% sugar content sap. Jones's rule says if we divide the number 86 by the percent sugar content of the sap, we will get how many gallons of sap we need to make a gallon of maple syrup. Now if we had 2% sap, that would mean we'd need 43 gallons of sap to make a gallon of syrup. But we've only got 1.5% sap, so it's going to take 70 gallons of sap to make a gallon of syrup. And this is typical very late in the season, that the sugar content in the sap is quite low. We need to get that 70 gallons of sap down to 1 gallon of maple syrup. So we have to get rid of 69 gallons of water. How are we going to get rid of 69 gallons of water and keep the little bit of sugar that's still in it? By boiling it. By turning the water into steam, it evaporates and goes out through the top of the sugar house, and the sugar stays behind, becoming more and more concentrated the more sap is boiled away. How do we do this? We do it with an evaporator. And an evaporator is a very efficient boiling machine. They're usually called a rig. And this rig is a 4 feet wide by 12 feet long. It has a flue pan in the back and a finishing pan in the front. The flue pan, which we'll see, is designed so as it to have many times the surface area of a flat pan. And this high surface area allows the heat exchange from the fire to cause the sap to boil faster and for more of it to become steam quicker. And it is hot. These are hardwood slabs, which are a byproduct of a sawmill. So we're really recycling them because otherwise they just get wasted. You can see in the back of the fire the flues that allow the flames to flow very close to the sap, which is down inside those little veins in the bottom of the pan called flues. And this increases the surface area of that pan many, many times, which increases the boiling rate many times, which helps us get rid of that 70 gallons of water for each gallon of syrup very quickly. Very quickly, I should have said more quickly, because it still takes quite a while. The sap in the back tank, where we saw it being pumped before and being stored, is now pumped up into this tank up here, where there's an even amount of pressure for the float valves to run and control the level in the evaporator. So from here, everything is gravity. The sap first flows through this pipe and into this preheater. Now the preheater takes cold sap and turns it into hot sap. And it's a lot more efficient to put hot sap into the evaporator than to put cold sap in there. It also gives us hot water, which we need for cleaning the sugar house when we're done. You can see the pipes inside here. The sap is flowing through those pipes and being heated by the steam which is being pushed in by these pipes here. And the sap here is cold. The sap coming out of the preheater it's too hot for me to hold my hand on this pipe right here. So this is what is flowing into the evaporator. Time to draw off the syrup. Now we're not going to draw off all the syrup at once. We just draw off what's ready, and we can tell that the syrup that is in this part of the evaporator is ready because of the boiling temperature. Right now it's boiling at 216 or a little better, and that's almost syrup. So we're going to draw it off now. We watch the thermometer. As less concentrated syrup moves through the baffles of the front pan, it will make the boiling temperature lower, down to 214. When that thermometer goes down to 214, we shut the valve, then we wait. It'll slowly build back up to 216, then we open it again. Now we can see that the thermometer is going from 216 back to 214. And it's almost ready to close the valve. Close enough. Now it'll only take a few minutes, and that thermometer will climb back up to 216 again, and we'll open it until it goes back down to 214. This is the syrup that we drew off from the front pan of the evaporator, and we're pouring it into the finishing pan. Here we'll use a hydrometer to accurately measure the sugar content and make sure that we've got it just right for maple syrup. It's very important that maple syrup have exactly the right sugar content. If the sugar content's not high enough, it's going to ferment. The bottles are going to swell up. When you open them, it's going to smell like stale beer. If you have too high a sugar content, the syrup is going to crystallize in the bottom of the bottle, and you'll only get a portion of what is in the bottle to pour out as syrup, and the rest of it's going to be stuck in the bottom as rock candy. Now you can get that to dissolve back by putting the container in a double boiler and heating it up again. The rock candy will dissolve and you'll be able to pour the syrup out, but it'll form again unless you add a little bit of water to it. So we have to make sure that we got the sugar content exactly right before we bottle the syrup. Maple syrup is very heavy, and that is one of the other things that helps us determine when we've got the right sugar content. As we saw with the thermometer, as the sugar content increases, the boiling point increases. The same is true with the density. As the sugar content increases, the density increases. So this hydrometer, which has a measured weight in the bottom, is designed to float at this red mark in maple syrup, in hot maple syrup. So we float the hydrometer, give it a spin to make sure that there's no air bubbles on it, and that red line is floating just above the surface, and that tells us that we're just a hair over the density for maple syrup. So this maple syrup needs to be slightly diluted with some more, a batch from the evaporator that's not quite as concentrated, before we run it through the filter press, and then we bottle it. But the hydrometer is the instrument that we use to measure the sugar content to be sure that we've got it just right. We have one more step before we can bottle this syrup, and that is we got to filter it. In the sap, along with a little bit of sugar, are dissolved minerals. When we concentrate the sugar, we're also concentrating the minerals. Fortunately, the minerals at the concentration of syrup crystallize so that they can be filtered out. And when you filter that out, what you have is called sugar sand, or niter is an old-fashioned word for the same thing. So when this is ready to go, it's going to go through this filter press, and the filter press will filter all the sugar sand, all the minerals out of the syrup, so we've got pure maple syrup going into the canner. This is the syrup after it's been through the filter press, and you can see how nice and clean and clear it is. The sap that made this syrup in these containers here was collected in the early part of the season when there was still snow on the ground, while the trees were still very cold. Well, the days actually were relatively cold compared to what they are now. The tree was completely dormant at this point when this sap was collected. So neither the tree nor biological activity that happens to the sap has had much of a chance to invert the sugars that are in that sap. When we collected the sap for this syrup, which was probably yesterday, it was almost 60 out. The tree's buds have started to swell. Both the tree and biological activity in the sap are inverting the sugar and making it into more complex sugars which have a richer flavor and a darker color. This is a maple syrup grading kit. You have to get a new one every year because the samples fade in color if you leave them for more than a year. So this is the 2000 kit. And you can see how we have some light amber syrup here. We have medium amber syrup in here. We have dark amber syrup in here. And we have grade B syrup, which we're making now at the end of the season, in here. All right, we're going to take a sample and see what the grade of this syrup that we just made is. Because we're very near the end of the season, it's likely to be very dark and most likely to be grade B. Let's see. It looks like it's considerably darker than the dark amber and just about as dark as the B. So I'd say that's grade B. We've seen today that there's a lot of science and some technology in making maple syrup. So first we saw that you need physics to get the sap into the buckets. We learned that as the tree warms up, the sap expands as the dissolved gases come out of solution and make bubbles, and that's what creates the pressure that pushes the sap up the tree and into the spout and out into the tubing or buckets. We also learned that there's chemistry, because we learned that as the sugar content of the syrup increases, the boiling temperature increases, and also the density increases. And that helps us to measure when we're at that point that the maple syrup is ready to draw off or bottle. We also learned that there's biology involved. At the beginning of the season, when it's cold and the tree is very dormant, the sap is not acted on by nature very much, and it makes very light syrup. As the season progresses, the tree comes out of dormancy, and its metabolism and the metabolism of other organisms causes the sugars to invert, become darker in color, and have a richer maple taste. So all these things combined together, all these different types of science, physics, chemistry, and biology, are important to understand in something just as simple as making maple syrup.
Thank you, Dickon. That's quite a process. I will remember it whenever I pour maple syrup on my pancakes. And thank you to all of our viewers. If you have a topic of a scientific nature that you would like to see on the show, please call us at 684-4441 or write to us at Dalton Community Television, 151 Park Avenue, Dalton, Massachusetts. Attention, gee whiz.